Whew, just in time. I just put a few new logs on the fire. So settle in for some great stories here on Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get you settled with some hot tea and a nice warm place to sit while we bring you some great stories by some great writers. This first story is written by a constant contributor, Mono Construction, and it talks about something I'm looking forward to greatly, which is retirement, though maybe not the retirement that the subject of the story thought he'd get. So let's hear a story about the last mission he performed in Special Operations. I need you to start at the beginning, Marcus. The way he spoke shook me to my core. Everything about him, from his slick-pressed gray suit to his black-top fedora, I could tell he had no background in Special Operations. I could also tell he was somebody you didn't want to upset, so I did as I was told. The mission towered before us like a shadow in the night, a recon of what we believed to be a terrorist organization's base, nestled deep inside the dense woods of the Appalachian Mountains. We were briefed thoroughly, equipped meticulously, and trained extensively. But, as we approached the seemingly abandoned compound, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air, like a premonition of impending doom. I led a reconnaissance unit, my voice steady as I issued orders over the radio. Stay sharp, everyone. Eyes peeled for any signs of activity. We do not know what we're walking into. The crackling of radio static filled the tense silence as my team spread out, cautiously advancing through the overgrown foliage surrounding the perimeter. Private Ryan Hayes, the youngest member of the team, kept glancing nervously at the dense forest that seemed to swallow the feeble light of the moon. "Sir, I've got movement to the east," Corporal Lisa Alvarez reported, her voice barely above a whisper. "Possible hostile activity," I nodded grimly. "Stay hidden and observe. We need to gather as much intel as we can before making our move." As the minutes stretched into hours, the tension mounted with each passing second. The forest seemed to be holding its breath as if in anticipation of the inevitable. Then, a sudden noise shattered the stillness, a low twig snap that sent Ryan into a cold sweat. "Did anybody else hear that?" Private Hayes asked, his voice trembling. "Negative," I replied, my grip tightening on the rifle. "Stay focused. We're not alone out here." I paused briefly while recounting the stark beginning to the mission Blackhawk, but it was enough to get the man's attention. The look he gave me alone struck fear into my soul. "Continue," he said in a deep, raspy voice. I still remember the taste of damp air. It reminded me of the calm before the storm. Then it happened. Gunfire echoed through the night as unseen assailants ambushed us from all sides. We were prepared for this and shot each body down one by one until only lifeless bodies on the ground remained. Amidst the chaos, Private Hayes found himself separated from the group, his heart pounding in his chest as he darted into the darkness of Appalachia. "Sir, I'm being chased by 3 to 4 hooded attackers requesting immediate backup," Hayes shouted into his radio, his voice laced with panic. "We're on our way, Hayes. Hold tight," I responded, my voice strained with urgency. As gunfire ceased, I noticed Hayes' labored breathing through the radio. His next words caught us off guard. "I'm navigating through a maze of dilapidated buildings. It seems I've lost them." Sense of foreboding washed over all of us. "The air's getting thick, and there's a stench unlike anything I've ever smelled. I see strange symbols covering the walls, Captain. I'm scared," Hayes said, his quivering voice barely audible over the crackling of the radio. As we continued to follow Hayes' tracker, we had also started to catch a slight scent of decay. He had caught it earlier, but this was to be expected, I thought. A few minutes later, and nothing from Hayes, we had decided to enter the maze of collapsed and crumbling buildings. A flare burned dimly near a building, so we decided to leave the other 2 men to stay and watch outside while we went inside. "Take a look at this," I said, pointing to the runic symbols that covered every surface. We surveyed the area with caution, only for the other two with us to start arguing. "There's more of those Magic the Gathering looking symbols," Apollo said. "Nah, definitely belongs to Dungeons and Dragons," Nexus argued. At this point, I was just wanting to get back home, but we had a job to do, and by the time I looked back after my train of thought, I found them wrestling each other on the ground over by the runes that we had come to look at. "Would you two fuckwits get off each other and shut up? We have to find Hayes and finish the mission," I half yelled, as not to give our position away, but enough for them to hear me clearly. "Who are you talking to?" Lisa asked. "The two idiots attracting unwanted attention," I snapped. "Marcus, they're out front, where you wanted them." My blood ran cold as I suddenly came back to it. I ordered Nexus and Apollo to stand watch outside the building complex while we went inside to look for Hayes. The radio suddenly crackled to life. "I found a back entrance to the building since it's starting to rain out here. I can barely hear you over the static." Hayes' voice chirped through the radio. "Permission to enter, sir?" Hayes asked, his voice trembling. "Granted. Enter cautiously and keep your eyes peeled. This is now a retrieval and extraction," I replied, my voice a lifeline in the dark. "I'm walking up to the building's back entrance now when I see something. Wait, it looks like hooded figures up ahead." His voice cut out mid-sentence as he presumably entered the building. "Shit," I said aloud and started jogging in the direction of the back entrance, hoping to get to a possibly hurt Hayes along with Lisa following me in pursuit. "Stay calm, Ryan, we're coming to get you," I replied, my voice strained with determination. As our reconnaissance team Delta rapidly approached the flare's back exit, we noticed a slight electricity in the air as our hair stood on end. When we first stepped foot into the building's back entrance, it was almost as if we had been put straight into a humid freezer, the kind you'd find at Uncle Mickey's house, and boy, it was freezing. The second thing we noticed was Hayes' rifle, empty. This made no sense, as we'd heard zero gunfire moments before. Me and Lisa were confused, but we had to move and make the extraction successful. "Apollo, Nexus, report in," I said over the radio, but I got nothing but a buzzing, crackling sound in return. "Signal must be weak," I muttered. Me and Lisa traversed the building's interior, our steel-toe boots hitting the wet floor. There was a tension in the air, and I knew why. Lisa doubted my ability to lead us. I swear I caught her eyeing me a few times. As we continued our imperial march down the hallway, we had encountered the dog tags of our boy Hayes. Not a good sign in all this. "Hayes, come in. Are you injured?" Nothing, just static. But a slight slur came out of the radio, like someone trying to speak for the first time. "Hayes, Nexus, Apollo, is that you? Come in." To our horror, the room we ended up walking into while distracted by the radio was, there's no good way to put it. It was filled with bones of all sizes. Some ranged from carrot size, while some ranged from the size of an oversized frying pan. "Holy crap," Lisa muttered under her breath. "This wasn't on any of the intel we had." She was right. Nothing could have prepared us for this. The radio crackled to life. "Turn around." We immediately swung around towards the door, and I'm not sure how, nor do I really care, but there was Apollo. I looked at Lisa, and she shot me a look of approval. She saw him, too. "I told you to stay outside," I said. "Sorry, our position was compromised, and we had to get the hell out of there," he explained. Where is your great dungeon master buddy Nexus?" I asked, with a touch of annoyance. "I don't know. We ran in two different directions," he said. They could have got him for all I know." That was when I noticed it. It was slight, and any average person would have missed it. His eyes. I was shining my flashlight straight in his face, yet I saw no reflection in his eyes. First I chalked it up to delusion, but the more I examined his physical appearance, the more irregularities I saw. His hair was slightly darker, his skin paler than usual. He seemed taller at one point. The teeth, when he showed a grateful grin, looked irregularly sharp, almost dagger-like. It appeared that Lisa hadn't seen what I was seeing, because she gave him a firm handshake as they set off to find Hayes and Nexus. He also had a tinge of blood smeared on the toe of his steel-toed boot. As they left the room, I trailed behind, making sure to keep an eye on Apollo. "Hello," a familiar voice said over the radio. Ryan sounded off. I didn't know how to describe it. He prolonged every word he said as if he were unsure that was the word he wanted to use. "Ryan, is that you?" I asked. "Yes," he responded. "Tell us where you are. We need landmarkers." "Go past," he said. "Can you repeat that?" I asked, but there was silence. It was as if he were choosing his next words very carefully. "Ryan, we need you to be more specific on your coordinates," I ordered in a stern, monotone voice. When he didn't respond, I ordered Lisa and Apollo to follow me deeper into the building that we had entered. I was trying to rationalize it by telling myself Hayes was probably slurring his speech due to the fact it was super cold and he could have hypothermia. Is it just me, or is it getting colder the further we go into this crumbling building? Lisa said, to no one in particular. "Can I get a minute to collect myself?" I said to the old agents that were collecting my memories like bees on a flower. They nodded and took a sip of water as they sat on the metal table in the room we lingered in. After a half a minute, I continued my account. We had rounded the corner, and we saw a figure just standing there in a dark hallway. It nerved the hell out of me, since it stood like a statue and as quiet as an asylum chamber. By the look of it, the figure had a uniform the same as the one we were wearing, which seemed odd. "Is that you, Hayes?" I called out towards the unmoving figure. It didn't respond, didn't move an inch to the sound of my command. Just as a precaution, I ordered the others to check their ammunition and point it forward just in case it got messy. And just then I noticed Apollo didn't have his rifle, which greatly confused me. "Apollo, where's your rifle?" I ordered. "I lost it in the scramble me and Nexus had earlier when the terrorists ambushed us, whilst waiting outside as you ordered us to," he replied, looking pale as he probably recounted it in his head. I gave him an angry stare, but shot my gaze back at the still unmoving figure. I held my hand up to tell Lisa and Apollo to stay put as I slowly closed the distance between me and it. As I came within a few feet of it, I poked the figure in the back with the tip of my rifle. It promptly fell over with a deafening, dull thud. "Holy Jesus on a skateboard!" I half yelled when I realized it was Nexus's uniform with his dog tags around the mannequin's neck. It was a mannequin, which scared the shit out of me and the others. How in the hell did this uniform and all get on a mannequin that just so happened to perfectly fit its clothes? This shit show was already making no sense, but now I felt like this was a low-budget nightmare. "They must have got him and done this as a sick joke to toy with us," Apollo said in a shaky voice. "We don't know that, but it is indeed a grim possibility. We got to remain on point and hope for the best, even though this job is never always about happy endings," I told them, sadness in my tone. We started checking and sweeping every room we came across, only to find nothing but dust and static on the radio, until we either heard a response on the radio or we came across any of our lost teammates. About 12 rooms down the hallway, we found a door slightly ajar, which we found all the others shut tight. I halted the unit and made a hand signal to proceed with guns drawn into the room. 3, 2, 1, I counted down quietly. When I hit 0, we entered the room with a slight pace in our stealthy entrance. To this very day, I wish we had left that room alone, but we had a job to do. What we found was Nexus. Well, what was left of him. You could barely call it a human. The mangled remains of Nexus lay sprawled amidst the surrounding rubble, an art piece of carnage. His form resembled a pulpy chaos, with flesh torn into ribbons and organs strewn about as though crafted by a butcher catering exclusively to Bundy and Dahmer themselves. Limbs were twisted at an unnatural angle, bones protruding through torn skin like jagged spears. Chunks of flesh had been ripped away, leaving gaping wounds that oozed crimson onto the ruined floor. His face contorted in betrayal. He was barely recognizable beneath the mass of ripped tendons and muscles. Eyes stared listlessly, wide with terror, while lips peeled back in a silent scream, revealing broken teeth protruding from the back of his throat and neck, as well as partially, and having his own tongue bitten off, hanging out of his mouth like a dog with its head out a car window. A rusty piece of rebar was protruding from the back of his head and out through where his left eye should have been. It was a scene of unimaginable horror, a testament to the merciless brutality of whoever had done this to Lieutenant Gabriel Nexus, and as we stood amidst the carnage, the realization dawned upon us that, in the darkness of the crumbling labyrinth, something merciless lurked, its bloodlust insatiable, and its thirst for harm unquenchable. "We need to get the hell out of here," I said out loud. Apollo and I shared the same unspoken thought, a lingering question that danced on the edge of our minds, until Lisa voiced it out loud, cutting through the tension. "Do we radio home base and request the dreadnoughts? Even if we do, which we should, I doubt they'd send them. It's not disastrous enough for them to intervene. Plus, those guys out there are just muscle. They'll shred everything they see," I replied, my confidence tinged with uncertainty. "It's worth a shot. Otherwise, we can always just bail in the armored truck we arrived in," Apollo said. "We'll be toast if we bail, whether or not the base agrees," I countered, my voice edged with a sneer. I thought over our options, and it became clear that there were no good choices. Stay and risk further danger, or call for the extraction and face potential consequences. Calling in the dreadnoughts wasn't viable either, as they were essentially a last resort. "Unit Delta to base, do you copy?" I asked sternly into the receiver. "Base to Delta, copy. What's the situation?" the man on the other end asked, with curiosity and professionalism. "Delta unit to base, we've got a KIA and an MIA. Multiple hostages surrounding the compound. Request immediate backup," I conveyed, a hint of panic evident. When the base hadn't responded right away, worry gnawed at my mind. Had we lost connection? "Base to Delta unit, backup denied due to current situation. Be advised, we are detecting multiple signatures around the area you are located in." "Delta unit to base, roger that. We'll be on site until the threat is neutralized," I confirmed before signing off. With no backup en route, we were left to fend for ourselves. As I straightened my back, I saw Hayes limping towards us, his condition shockingly worse than I imagined. His skin drooped in some areas and stretched thin in others, a grim sight that made my skin crawl. "Hayes, is that you? Where have you been?" I asked, a mix of relief and anger in my voice. Hayes barely acknowledged my presence. His demeanor was unsettling, but before I could dwell on it, I spotted a few flashlights in the distance, coming from the group of 3 people patrolling the area. I thought to myself that I'd have to grill his brains out later when we got back to base, if we finished this mission alive. I was about to brief the team on our next move when I realized that Hayes was missing again. Alarm bells rang in my mind. Hadn't I just seen him a moment ago? "Did anyone notice Hayes?" I asked, a chill creeping up my spine. "Yeah, he said something about scouting a vantage point down the hill," Apollo replied. "Check on him. Make sure he's okay," I ordered, my unease growing. "That directive will haunt me forever, Agent..." "Wait, you never told me your first name," I said, addressing the agent from the FBI, ATF, or whatever damn organization he was from. "I suspect you're delaying what you must disclose, eager to return to your solitary abode and share this tale with your online acquaintances. But should you do so, I have no choice but to imprison you for violating the NDAs I'll provide once the story concludes. So refrain from inquiries and proceed," the seasoned individual growled, his voice resonating with the weight of years and authority, leaving me shaken to my core. "Apologies," I murmured. Apollo had ventured off to check up on Hayes, and I noticed a few figures tentatively crouching alongside the building, just a floor below us. Those terrorists were going to try to get the jump on our unit if we stepped a foot outside the building we were located in. "Guys have spotted 4 armed figures crouched on the east wall just a floor down from the window," I said into the radio. I saw Apollo barrel through the open doorway and nearly crash through a closed door before he could stop himself. He looked white as a ghost and out of breath, like he'd just run a full marathon. "Hey, watch what you're doing, Apollo," barked Lisa, as she had a near miss with Apollo colliding into her. "Captain, I found Hayes," he said, shakily, though his tone was barely audible. "Is he all right?" His body's gone." "What are you talking about, Apollo? He's right over there," I demanded. "His body is gone. Only his skin's there," Apollo said, his knees buckling and shaking under his weight. I hadn't realized at the time. It took me a few seconds to process what he had said. When I figured out what he meant, I bolted towards the hallway and found the room where Hayes went to find a good vantage point. When I finally found the room, I goggled at the sight in horror. Before us lay Private Hayes, or what remained of him, a ghastly mass of shredded skin draped over the cold earth. His skin, once a canvas of life, now hung in tattered shreds, a macabre tapestry stretched over a devoid room. With only his skin remaining, the flesh was shredded strips like a shedded snakeskin. Before the shredded remains, there was nothing but emptiness, a void where muscle and sinew once pulled with vitality. Now emptied by, well, nothing. Blood, thick and viscous, seeped from the shredded remains, mingling with the barely scented room in a sickening display. His face, a face of surprise and pain, bore the brunt of humanity's fury. Eyes, wide with horror, stared sightlessly into the abyss, their once vibrant hue now dulled by the chill embrace of death. Lips, torn and mangled, were frozen in a silent frown, a testament to the unspeakable damage that he had endured. Amidst all the desolation, one thing was clear. Private Hayes was beyond salvation. Apollo appeared behind me suddenly with a surprisingly calm expression. What I hadn't noticed before was that the hunting knife situated on his waistband was missing when I saw it a few minutes later. "Apollo, where's your knife?" I asked with concern. "Probably lost it in the ambush earlier," he said nervously. "You better be right about that. Don't lose weapons the terrorists can use against us." At this point, Lisa tried to look around the doorway, but we had subdued her efforts and forced her away from the room. We needed to radio base so we could leave, with or without their permission. I didn't care if I got my head booted in by my boss or not. When I came back into the room, though, I noticed tossed furniture and bloodstains leading towards the closet door. "Apollo, watch my back," I told him. I crept to the closet door, and the smell got stronger with each step. It was heavy with copper and the slight hint of decay. I stood at the door, and in one swift motion I swung open the creaky old thing, and I found the rest of Hayes inside. That's when I noticed it, a detail that turned my blood from ice to boiling hot rage. The knife protruding from his sternum, a knife with Apollo's bloodied initials on the handle. Next thing I knew, my temper exploded like Krakatoa, erupting after 1,000 years of rage. "You son of a bitch!" I screamed at him, not caring who could hear me. Before he could rifle his gun at me, I pulled my service pistol out of my holster and fired a shot that ripped through his shoulder. He managed to pull a shot off at me too, but the bullet only grazed my thigh. His agonizing yells and moans of pain echoed throughout the building, Lisa bursting into the room where I shot him, with the remains of Hayes' skin and innards still strewn around. "Marcus, put your gun down. What are you doing?" she demanded. "He killed Hayes. I saw what was left of him in that closet. Apollo's knife still in him." I thought I might be losing my mind, but the thought was pushed aside when Lisa confirmed what I saw only a few minutes ago. She looked down at the now profusely bleeding Apollo and gave him a look I could only describe as pure hate. Before I could tell her to handcuff him and not cause any more damage, she grabbed her sidearm and put one right between his eyes. "Jesus Christ, Alvarez, what did you do that for?" She didn't answer. "Let's get out of here. I just need to radio base on our next move," I said aloud. "Unit Delta to base, come in." But there was nothing but static. I guess the concrete building was blocking the radio signal, so we'd have to leave on our own accord. I peeked out the window and didn't see any hostiles around or approaching our current location. Perhaps they'd left the compound in fear of more officers being called down to take the rest of them. "Let's just get out of here and back to base. I just can't stand seeing any more death tonight," Lisa told me, with desperation in her voice. We trudged down the stairs and peeked out the front entrance to find the corpses of the terrorists we had shot down. We proceeded with rifles drawn, along with swiftness that was questionable, considering that stealth would have been a good-sized priority right now. When we were about 100 yards away from the armored truck, Lisa tripped on a root that stuck out of the ground. She stumbled and fell at an awkward angle, cracking her head on one of the large rocks that dotted the area. "Shit, Lisa, are you all right?" She didn't respond, and I assumed she was either unconscious or dead from her untimely fall. Ultimately, I had to carry her 100 or so yards to the truck. When I put her in the back, I hopped into the driver's seat and noticed the keys were still in the ignition. My dumbass had left them there, and I was lucky that nobody had decided to steal our escape route. I turned the ignition, and the vehicle rumbled with steady intensity, ready to take us far, far away. "So that's my story, my adults-only fairy tale you wanted out of me, Agent." I spoke to him in an overall tired tone. "And how is Lisa holding up these days?" "She's brain dead, since the blow to her head gave her major brain damage. She'll never remember this mission, and she'll need to live in an assisted living home until the end of her days." In the end, the agent made me sign a bunch of NDAs and sent me on my way. That's my story, and I'd place some bets that the agents will be pretty pissed when they figure out that I recorded our entire conversation on my old 90s tape recorder. I'll leave you with some advice, though. Humanity will always be the apex predator to what it can conjure up against you. At least you can hide under the covers from the monsters under your bed, but when you're faced with someone with true horrific intent, all you can do is watch the fight unfold. Whew, such a powerful story. And a long one, too. I know how you guys like those long stories. So, let's keep right on rolling with another great tale. By TJPI, another oftentimes contributor to the channel. Let's talk about something a little more mundane. Something that maybe we've all had to deal with back in college or high school. Though, I hope your experience with it isn't as creepy as the one we're about to talk about. So let's hear a story about the local study hall and the strange rules that surround it. I would love to simply study at home, but it's tough to concentrate for more than a few minutes when your parents are arguing 24/7 in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. I'm the type of guy who needs to focus for hours to consider it productive. Despite everything, the screaming would have been more than worth it if I had anticipated the following events. The night of the incident was Friday. It was 4 days prior to my final chemistry exam before the Christmas break. I walked into the study hall at 11:43 p.m. and greeted the old man who was sitting at the information desk. He also happened to be the man who funded the study hall, so whenever he asked me to reiterate the mandatory rules, which was every time I walked in, regardless on whether it was the first or the 500th time, I had no choice but to do it. Let me get you up to speed on these rules. I'll spare you the details and only tell you about the most important ones. Make sure every single light in the study hall is on until you leave. When you leave, make sure the door sign says closed. When leaving, make sure you are illuminated at all times. Never, and I mean never, turn off a light that's above you. Make sure you're not in the dark either, not even for a split second. If it's still dark out, do not forget to lock the door when you walk out. If the sun's already out by the time you leave, I'll lock it myself. Just leave it. If I hear any humming, ignore it. Do not go check or look at what it is. I never heard anyone humming outside the study hall, but rules is rules. Never pick up the phone for anyone after I leave, no matter what. This never happened either. Do not, I repeat, do not stay in the study hall after 6 a.m. You're not allowed to come back until 9 a.m. After reiterating the rules that have been drilled into me more than the periodic table, I dapped up the old man before sitting down. I always sat down in the same seat. The first few hours went by in a flash, as always. However, I got disrupted at 2:30 a.m. That's because it's when the old man goes home for the night, leaving the massive study hall to, well, just me. Today, I chose to hang around for a little longer. Quite frankly, I didn't want to get another slap from my parents after realizing I got an A- on my final exam. I had to remain focused and study for a little longer. A few hours more, which felt more like 10 minutes, went by. The clock had finally hit 5:55 a.m. I wouldn't have realized it if it wasn't for the alarm I set for myself. Jolting myself back to reality, I began to set everything up to make sure I didn't upset the old man. He can get a little cranky sometimes. My brain was completely fried. My vision was blurry too. I packed my bags and turned off all the lights in the necessary order to ensure that I stayed true to the rules. I've done this so many times that I didn't even have to think about it anymore. As I opened the front entrance, I turned off the final light. Concurrently, the clock hit 6 a.m. It was still dark outside, as dark as when I came in at 11:43 p.m. Inhaling the cold, fresh air of the countryside, I stuttered as I heard a loud ringing sound piercing my eardrums. It was the rotary phone on the old man's desk. "Shit," I muttered under my breath. I didn't expect it to be so loud. I rubbed my eyes and yawned. Unfortunately, that only made my eyes heavier. I should turn it off before I call it a night. Taking a step back inside, I gasped as I remembered that I had to turn on the lights whenever I was inside. I did so, accordingly, before reaching out to the phone. Realization struck me as one of the rules popped back into my head, making me stop. Never pick up the phone for anyone after I leave. Oh, right, I thought to myself. Better for me to leave it. I sighed and scratched the back of my head. Can't wait to finally sleep, I told myself, yawning. As I turned back around, my ears picked up on a sound from far away. A sound that kept getting louder by the second, although only slightly. I don't know why, but the sound alone sent shivers down my spine, waking me up instantly. It echoed across the study hall. As it got louder, I felt an insane pressure weighing down on me. It felt similar to the pressure one gets during sleep paralysis. As I felt my chest being crushed, I deeply inhaled and exhaled. I looked back at my shaky palms, eyes widening. What the hell, I thought to myself. What's wrong with me? It was a strange sensation, one I had never felt before. Everything felt off, eerie. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud coming from behind me, the sound of a heavy object crashing onto the ground. Instinctually, I turned around and jumped backwards, screaming. On the other side of the hall stood a shadowy figure. It was over 8 feet tall. Its lankiness was towering over me, its arms looking long enough to reach out and grab my head. It's where the humming tunes were coming from. At that very moment, I felt completely unsafe, as if the figure was going to jump out at me. All I could hear was my heart beating in my throat. "Screw this," I shouted. I turned around, bolting out the door, not even looking back once. As I was running, I could feel something chasing after me from behind. Despite that, I couldn't hear anything besides my breathing and quiet grunting. As soon as I made it home, I slammed the door shut and locked it. Throughout the night, my mind was racing with different thoughts. No matter what, I couldn't take the feeling that something was close to me, keeping an eye on me from nearby. Whenever I tried to close my eyes, I could see the figure rushing towards me at a speed I couldn't visualize. Before it could catch me, I opened my eyes with a loud gasp. However, the pressure persisted. Who was the figure standing on the other side of the hall? It looked nothing like the old man. Eventually, I dozed off and woke up a few hours later to a text from a number I didn't recognize.
"Hey, you that kid who always goes to the study hall every night?" it wrote. My heart skipped a beat. I chose to ignore it. No way I was going to let it trouble me because of some stupid rules. It must have been my nerves of the exam coming up. As I see the same number typing again, I blocked it. I had no interest in getting involved in whatever I'd seen yesterday. That night, I readied myself for another study session. I decided that I would leave the study hall at the same time as the old man to avoid a similar situation. He left about 2:30 a.m. I wanted to tell him about last night, but I was scared that I would get in trouble. I nervously walked to the study hall and greeted the old-timer. However, something felt off. He was staring into my eyes a lot more intently than usual, even after I recited the rules again to reassure him. He didn't seem mad or anything, just off. I figured it was paranoia. No way he could know anything about yesterday, right? After all, I didn't break any rules, and he wasn't even there for most of it, right? I sat down at the same chair as last night. Discomfort grew as I glanced to see the old man staring right at me from his seat. I took a deep breath and put on my earphones. Minutes later, I received a text. It was from the old man. I had his contact saved just in case, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to receive a message from him. However, why would he text me when he was right here in the room? "Hey, I wanted to let you know that I'm running some errands out of town at the moment. I think you've been in the study hall enough times for me to trust you alone for one night. Don't mess anything up. I'll be back Monday morning," it wrote. My heart stopped as I read it. Running errands out of town. I started shaking, rereading it over and over again. Running errands out of town. I slowly looked up, the old man at the information desk, still staring right at me. The pressure I felt on my chest last night came back. The light started to flicker subtly as my breathing became shallower and quicker. My body tensed up, and I was paralyzed. Out of town. If that's the case, then who am I in the study hall with?
Well, I think it might be a little dry around the fire for the subject of our next story, but we're gonna soldier on with a tale from Siren Satyr about some strange cryptids that live in a lake around their summer house. So let's hear about the Sirens of Fairbank Lodge.
My mother used to tell me stories of sirens, specifically the sirens that lived in the lake near the lodge up in Fairbank that her family had owned for a long time. The lodge itself was a bit secluded, almost fully hidden behind an acre of forest. There was one road leading in and out, where the lodge and the lake sat. To be fair, the path we took was more dirt than road, and it was about a 20-minute drive to the nearest town. We went there every summer while I was growing up, and I always tried my best to search for the sirens my mother talked about. She told me time and time again that it was rare to catch such a supernatural sighting. But when the sky rains down and the winds are swift, you might be able to hear them. They sing above the whistle of the air, crying their blessing to the heavens above that water their lake, nourishing their home with its tears, she would say, her eyes glassy as she spoke, a small, serene smile playing over her lips, as if she was replaying a memory in her head. This, however, was not a satisfactory enough answer for an overly curious mind, and during every visit I would grab my scuba goggles and search the waters as much and as long as I could. I was never able to get too far down below the inky darkness was all that I could see, though, the deeper water far too out of reach from the sunlight above. My father, well, he had no time for such nonsense. He would roll his eyes and scoff any time Mother would begin her stories. It would make her brow crinkle, not at all happy with his mockery of the story passed down to her from her mother. However, as I grew older, so too did his annoyance with these so-called fairy tales my mother spun. He'd tell her I was getting too old to believe in such things, that her stories were nothing but bedtime tales for young children. This became one of the many arguments that they had throughout their marriage as time went on. As the years continued to go by, their relationship only seemed to get worse, and I was becoming aware of it quickly. There was always this tenseness that hung heavy in the air whenever they would be in the room together for too long. I would have been too young, but I wasn't blind or stupid. I didn't know exactly why their marriage was deteriorating, and I never thought to ask, as it seemed more like grown-up problems that I wouldn't be able to understand. Maybe over all those years, they had both just become different people, different than they had been when they'd first met, and they were no longer on the same page when it came to life goals. I don't know. Slowly, their disdain for each other became harder and harder to hide from me, though. I could sometimes hear them at night, fighting with each other in the late hours, hushed whispers laced with poison that would leak into my ears through the thin walls of the house. They never knew I listened, and I never said anything as they continued their charade, as if I couldn't see the cracks forming between them. That was another reason I loved the lodge. It was the only place that they never argued, either in front of me or in their room. It was our vacation away from the stresses of the monotony of life. Perhaps it was even a silent agreement between them. When they were at the lodge, they were happy. We were a happy family, or at least we pretended to be. And for a long time, I was okay with pretending we were happy too. The first time I saw a siren on the lake was the day before my mom died. She and Dad had gone for a hike through the forest up in the hills by the cliffs, and I had opted to stay behind. Maybe I'll take a look for sirens again, I joked. Although at 15, I'd given up looking for them a long time ago. I was growing up, after all, and despite my love of my mother's stories, even I was growing to doubt their validity. Dad sighed in annoyance, and Mom put a placating hand on his shoulder to try and ease his frustration. "Well, if you find one, I'd love to hear the story when we get back. We should be in well before the storm is supposed to be this evening," Mom had said with a grin. I waved them goodbye as they started their trek and watched them slowly disappear from view as they were swallowed up by the woods surrounding the lake. The sun had been above the trees when they had left. An hour later, when the storm began to quickly move in, they had not yet returned. I was starting to get worried. The wind had become a real tempest out there. I could hear the wailing gusts as they began to whistle over the lodge. The rain began to slap hard against the roof of the lodge as the downpour grew worse. The sky was growing even darker by the minute. I stood to watch at the window, looking for any signs of my parents. Then the lightning struck, lighting the entirety of the ground, yet still no sign of them. I went to the landline, but just as I picked up the phone, the power went out. I tried to phone anyway, but it was dead. My heart began to race, and I panicked, wondering what to do. I could go to the car, go for help in town. I didn't know how to drive, though, but I'd risk it. I knew the way to town, at least. I could get the police and round up a search party. With my mind made up, I grabbed my parka off the coat rack and Dad's keys from the other side, getting ready to face the onslaught of wind and rain that I was sure I'd be fighting every second on the way there. I was running down the front steps to the porch towards Dad's car when I first heard it. It made me stop, dead in my tracks, and I wondered for the briefest second if I was imagining things. High above the screaming wind, there was another sound, an ethereal bell-like ringing dancing across the air. Or was that the sound of someone singing? I slowly turned towards the sound coming from the lake, my heart beating like a drum in my chest, my breath catching quickly in my throat. And there she was, the obsession of my childhood, the creature of the stories I had heard about for so long. I could see her, even through the darkness of the storm. She was above the water from the waist up, the rest of her body hidden below the shadows of the lake. The lightning scattered around the sky in quick succession, showing brief glimpses of the siren's full body in bits and pieces. Mother had said long ago that sirens were not the way they were in the storybooks. They were not beautiful maidens with long, shining hair and warm, supple skin. They looked like the creature before me now. She had no hair at all. Her head was bare and smooth like the rest of her from what I could see. She had chalk-white skin and black, beady eyes that stared me down as she sang. Her lips were thin and horrifyingly wide. She had 2 long rows of teeth that were white as bone, and every single one of them was sharply pointed, almost reminding me of a shark. I'd always expected to be excited if I ever caught a glimpse of a siren, despite being warned of their appearance. But this feeling that was creeping through me was like ice. That wasn't excitement. It was slow dread that was growing and pooling in my stomach as I stared, frozen in place by her song. A dull numbness began to set in, and the sound of the wind began to fade into the background, leaving nothing behind but the beautiful bell-like song. I could feel myself walking away from the car and towards the edge of the lake. I was caught by the bait of her song, and had gotten trapped in the dark abyss of her eyes. A siren's beauty does not come from her body alone. She sings to make you look, and when she catches your eye, that's what ensnares her human prey. Mother would say, snapping her fingers in my face. She would even eat me? I'd asked. Mother had shaken her head, smiling. No, my dear. Not these sirens, at least. Not the ones in our lake. These sirens are different. They will not harm someone of our family line, for we are the ones who brought them here so long ago. We're bound to each other, us and them. She would say that last part in a whisper, as if it was a secret. Maybe it was, as she never spoke about it again. But even now, even remembering her words, I felt a shiver of doom crackle through me as I got closer. The singing got louder, higher, shriller, until it was all I could hear. There was no wind, no rain, no thunder, just her song. I could see her better now as I trudged into the lake, my legs moving forward with a mind of their own. Her skin was like leather. I could see the gums around her white, jagged teeth, and they were all black as coal. Her fingers were long and thin, ending in black, sharp, needle-like points. She looked like my worst nightmare come to life, but still, I couldn't pull myself away from her eyes. Her damn eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry, to run, but I was at the mercy of this thing. I guess it's true what they say. Be careful what you wish for. Her song stopped mid-note when I finally stepped within her reach. A long, spindly arm snapped out to grab my left wrist, and she lifted it to my line of sight before lifting her other hand and plunging a long black thumbnail into my wrist. Sirens can tell us the future, I remembered, my 10-year-old self asking with excitement. Mother hushed me, for it was long past bedtime, but I had begged for just one more fact that she knew about the sirens. Yes and no. They can't see all, only bits and pieces that don't change no matter what we do or try to prevent it, Mother explained. I held on to that memory even as the shock of pain webbed up through my arm, through my chest, and then into my head. I could see it, what the siren had wanted to share with me, the reason she had called me into the darkness. I screamed, and then it was over. I don't know how long I sat there in the dirt and the mud, the water of the lake gently lapping around my waist as I stared out into the slow, waning storm. The wind had slowed, the rain had gentled, and with the chaos of Mother Nature's ever-changing mood slipping away from whence it came, the siren too disappeared with it, slipping back into the lake without a sound or a ripple, as if she had never been there at all. Heavy footsteps pulled me from my revelry, and I didn't need to turn to see it was my dad, nor did I need to look to know he was alone. When I finally turned to look up at that looming, soaking figure, his face was grim, and his hands were shaking. They'd lost track of the time and had gotten caught at the beginning of the storm. The darkness had overwhelmed them quickly, and even with their flashlights, it was a treacherous journey they had to make back down the trail as they came. Mother had walked a bit too close to the edge of a cliff, and the mud had given way under her steps. Then she fell. Just like that, she was gone. My father was quiet for a while after that. Even at her funeral, he was stoic and cold. I overheard some of the adults talking amongst themselves, telling each other how sad it was that she was gone, and how my father had to be strong for me. We didn't talk much after that day, and we didn't go back to the Fairbanks Lodge for a long time after that either. I never told him what I saw. I knew he'd never believe me anyway. I didn't go back again until I was 19. I took Mom's ashes with me, and I made sure to check the weather report on my app before I went. I waited and bided my time until I knew that it was just the right time. Then I called my dad. I told him I wanted us to spread Mom's ashes in the lake, and I wanted him to be here. He seemed resistant at first, but after a few minutes of begging, he relented. The wind was beginning to gust just as I saw the Jeep pulling up to the lodge. Rain was beginning to pour down harder when he got out. He was running up towards the porch in an attempt to escape the onslaught of the rain. When he stopped, he could hear it in the wind, the beginning of her song. I stood resolutely on the porch, making a point to avoid the view of the lake to my side. I saw him turn to look, and snap, he was snared. I watched him walk to the shoreline, and I watched him walk into the water. I watched until his head disappeared under the waves of the lake, following the heavy, dangerous voice and eyes of the creatures that lived below the darkness of the water. That day, the first day I ever saw a siren, my mom died, but not because she slipped. I know that because I know how she died. The siren showed me. She showed me how my parents began to fight on their hike, a fight bigger than I'd ever seen them have before. She showed me how in a fit of rage, my father had pushed my mother. He pushed her right off that cliff and to her death below, just as I now sent him to his death below. Like father, like daughter, I guess. I finally allowed myself to look towards the lake, my face devoid of emotion, and I saw her that one last time, the siren who snared me so long ago and had let me go. For I was bound to her, and she was bound to me, and she would not harm me, for I was my mother's blood. The same could not be said of my father. She gave me a subtle nod before disappearing beneath the waves again, leaving no evidence of either her or her visit, except the perfectly round white scar that I would bear on my left wrist until the day I met my end. I sighed as the storm continued to howl around me, creating a whistling sound as it ascended to the sky overlooking Fairbank Lodge. Or is that the sound of someone singing, perhaps?
That's a story I always like to hear. I love stories about mermaids and sirens and things like that. I know some people think they're cute, or some people think they're beautiful, but sirens and mermaids and creatures of the ocean have always kind of freaked me out, so it's good to see I'm not alone in that. Moving right along from strange cryptids, we go into an equally as odd being, strange and annoying bosses. Brought to us by Narow Muscle9572. Let's hear a story that might make you a little thankful that you don't work for the boss in question. So, let's hear about how maybe you think your boss is bad.
What can I say to these people? The community center is filled with cigarette smoke. Everyone here sits in a circle of chairs to complain about their bosses, how they get called to come into work even when they're approved for time off, how they get screwed out of holiday bonuses or maternity care and more. I don't say anything when I come here. I sit quietly and listen and think about how I got where I am. When it's my turn to talk, I pass. It's not like I'm going to say these people have it easier than I do. My story started in my sophomore year of college. During that time, I didn't have many options in way of employment. The few people who were willing to work around my classes already had enough workers, and weren't hiring. Thankfully, there were plenty of odd jobs listed on the cork boards scattered around campus. Most of them didn't pay much and only required a few hours of your time. But the pay was better than nothing, and I'd rather eat ramen every day for a month than nothing at all. Unfortunately, lots of people were in the same boat, so all these jobs were first come, first serve. Eventually, I found one asking for a handyman. I don't know my way around tools, but I was young and dumb enough to justify that with the aid of a good YouTube tutorial, I could easily learn how to install sinks or change the oil in a car. When I arrived for my first day, my initial impression of Professor Borgenson was that he didn't look like any professor I'd ever seen. He was tall, but very thin. His hair was dark, but there was some gray at the temples, making him look older than he was. If I had to guess, he was in his early 30s. He explained that the job was easy, and the first thing I would have to do would be to remind him to eat. I found that a little funny and smiled, but he was serious. He then explained that he often gets lost in his work and forgets little things like that. When he told me the pay, I accepted the job right away. I'd begin every day by brewing his coffee in a pot, which he would serve himself. Thankfully, my classes were close, so this never interfered with my day. I'd do this again between 2 and 4 in the afternoon each day as well. The second time I went to his office, I would call restaurants and either have them deliver to him or pick up something for him to eat. In less than a week, he told me to keep the coffee coming, but he didn't need me to order food every day. After a few months, he started to tell me to do things that made me nervous. First, it was things like grabbing a file from some other office, but would escalate to picking up packages in weird and occasionally terrifying places. Before long, he had me taking chemicals out of the lab without proper paperwork. Each time I approached him about this, he would say that everything was above board and not to worry about it. When the chem lab treated the chemicals I took as though they were stolen, I went to Borgenson and told him about it, begging him to clear this up. That was when I learned that Borgenson was using this information to blackmail me. As horrible as he wasn't completely unsympathetic to my situation, and agreed to give me my college credits if I kept doing the jobs he asked me to do. I didn't have much of a choice. At this point, he had enough information to get me expelled from school, so I continued to work for him. Besides, who would the police be more likely to believe? Me, or a man who was up for an award in excellence in laboratory science for neurological research? After that, I stole copper wire for him. He required so much that I was working on it for the better part of a month. Sometimes the buildings I stole from were being developed. Other times it was someone's house who happened to be gone for the holidays. I tried to ask him what kind of experiments he was working on, but everything I asked, he would fly into a fit of rage and frustration, complaining about how hard the work he was doing really was, and that he didn't have time to go into details because it would surely go over my head. In my junior year, he started using me as an alibi, either to get out of some kind of trouble or as an excuse so he could leave and return to his secretive experiments. Every time he'd have me meet somebody, he'd coach me on what to say to them and when to say it. I'm abruptly taken out of my thoughts when the next person in the support group starts talking. I'm only half paying attention. I'm thinking about Borgenson and staring at the same 3 triangles on the floor. I hear her say something about compensation for driving. A slight smile crept over my face when I heard this, because I wished I had that woman's problems. At least Borgenson gave me a truck and refunded me on the gas I used when I drove around, picking up the freshest roadkill I could find. During my senior year, I learned about Professor Borgenson's connections with some people in the school's zoology department. I discovered this when I actually had the official paperwork to pick up the body of howler monkeys and the body of a bonobo ape. I had been in his house a few times, But the first time I was allowed inside was right before the hurricane was about to make landfall. I thought I was called to help him prepare his house for the rain, but instead it was to do something I was not prepared for. It smelled of the same chemicals that I had stolen for him, and a coppery smell that was not unlike the scent of blood. In his upstairs bedroom was a makeshift lab, and in it was the body of a huge and hideous creature, strapped to a table and submerged in ice. It was hard to see the body, but to me it was as though he'd stitched many of them together. Borgenson was in a rush and was in no mood to answer questions. He needed to do this experiment before the storm hit, and since he still had all the blackmail material over my head, I did too. After hours of telling me to flip a switch here or press a button there, the hurricane was right on top of us. I wanted to stop, but Borgenson insisted that we keep at it, and that it was now or never. I was terrified as the gale force wind broke the windows. Borgenson had to yell over it for me to hear his instructions, but eventually he gave this creature a pulse. Since we were on the second floor and the hurricane was tearing the house apart all around us, we had to bring this unconscious body down to the main floor, where Borgenson had converted a small room into a cage. Borgenson and I were barely able to get to the basement by the time the hurricane tore the house apart. As the water rose and the violent sound of wind filled my ears, I prayed that I would get out of this. Borgenson, on the other hand, was only concerned about the thing he had created. When it was all over and the hurricane had passed, we discovered the body of the creature had been crushed and died. There is supportive clapping when the last speaker is done telling their story. I clap along, and when it's the next person's turn to speak, I keep my chin on my chest and return to my thoughts. The next person complains about unpaid wages, but I can't relate to that. Borgenson was many things, but he was not a wage thief, and paid me for everything I'd done. Disgruntled by the loss of his creature, Borgenson left me alone, and I was able to focus on my studies. The rare times I saw him were when I prepared his coffee. It was during one of these times that he told me that since I was a senior and wouldn't be around forever, he was searching for a new assistant. After telling me this, he solemnly shook his head and gave me my last payment with a generous bonus, especially for someone with my financial situation. I couldn't have been happier, not because of the money, but because I was finally free of the man who I learned to hate with every fiber of my being. I would soon graduate and move back to my hometown, where I would spend 10 years repressing the memories of Professor Borgenson. A man in the group who goes by Barry is the next to speak. He complains about his boss calling him into work on pre-approved days off. I feel for him. In a weird way, I can relate. Thought I was done with Borgenson, but then one night a stranger comes to Moe's bar, my place of employment. He seems friendly, and even though he didn't look familiar, I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of what I'd seen in the mirror after a night doing Borgenson's bidding. Once the barflies started making their way out, the stranger confessed that he was the newest assistant to Borgenson, and the only reason he was at the bar was because Borgenson was in town and needed my help. I refused, but when the stranger told me that Borgenson still had the blackmail material, and if I didn't come along, he was going to use it against me. When Barry wraps up his story, everyone claps, and it snaps me out of my memories and returns me to the present. It's my turn to speak. I've been coming to the support group for a long time, but I've never said more than 2 words. After all, what can I say? That if I could, I'd trade my position with any of these people. That they should get on their knees and thank their lucky stars for not having bosses that blackmail them. That Borgenson still forces me to do things for him, like stealing bodies from the morgue. There's only one answer I can come up with. Pass.
One more story for you. and I promise I haven't skimped on the very last one. Brought to us today by Mr_Outlaw_. Let's hear about another creepy creature that might bring a lot of strife to your life. Sometimes there's nothing worse, and I mean nothing, not sirens in your lake or weird bosses or any of that, to compare with a strange and annoying roommate, especially one that may not be paying their part of the utility bill. So let's hear a story about how their roommate's been in the shower for hours. So I got home at about 11 p.m. Late night at the office turned into an even later night at the bar. About 4 drinks deep at this point, and I'm tired, just about ready to fall asleep as I stumble through the doorway. I lay down on the couch and reach for my bag so I can take out my laptop and watch YouTube. I'm in the middle of watching some luxury cruise tour, close to passing out, when I hear the front door open. I sit up and turn my head slightly, just enough to see my roommate coming in. He hangs up his jacket in the closet and doesn't say anything, just slowly walks towards his room. It's pretty normal for him. I've been living with him for about 3 months, long enough for me to pick up on most of his tendencies. The guy really doesn't talk unless you talk to him, which was far from a problem for me. He also generally keeps things clean on his end, never causing much in the way of problems. Really can't complain. So I go back to watching YouTube, and about 5 minutes later, I hear the shower in his room turn on. Once again, nothing strange there. At this point, I'm watching bare-knuckle boxing highlights with my eyes half open, maybe 1 or 2 minutes away from passing out. I remember waking up in darkness, my head hurting, my throat dry as hell. I sat up slowly, waiting for the grogginess to settle into something manageable. Once again, I grabbed my phone, checking the time. It's about 3:30 a.m., at least that's what I remember. I was starving at that point, so I got up and began walking to the fridge. That's when I noticed it. A soft but ever-present noise in the background. It took me a few minutes to really recognize what it was. It was the shower. Suddenly, the events of last night began replaying in my head. Drinking at the bar, Ubering home, laptop, couch, my roommate coming home, and the shower turning on. Stood there for a while, just trying to make sense of it. Maybe he went to bed and forgot to turn it off. I shook my head. There's no way that could happen, I thought. Maybe he slipped and fell. Realizing the implication of this, I rushed towards his room and found his bathroom door locked. I started pounding on it. Hey, you all right? No response. I considered kicking the door down, but I decided to call 911 before I did it. I took my phone out, preparing to dial, and that's when I noticed that I had an unread text from my roommate. Hey man, couldn't sleep. Went over to my girlfriend's place. Not sure when I'll be back. That was 2 hours ago. I look at the bathroom door and then back down at my phone. Everything about this was wrong. First off, my roommate barely texts me and certainly never to tell me he's going out. Second, I know for a fact that he's single and has been for a while. Third, and most important, who was in the shower then? I tried calling him. No answer. Sent him some texts, but I got no response. I walked over to his desk and saw that his keys and wallet are still beside his laptop. My head started spinning at that point, and I just got out of there. I go back into the living room and turn on the lights. I'm pacing around in a circle, trying to follow the plot while I'm trying to ignore the shower, a noise that I never could have imagined being so dreadful. Sometime later, I hear something vibrating on the kitchen counter. I move towards it and see that it's a phone. It's my roommate's phone. The
panic begins setting in, and I immediately grab my keys and run out of the apartment. I make my way down the hall and take the stairs down the lobby, but even that doesn't seem far enough away, so I make my way over to McDonald's across the street. I sit there for a while, considering calling the cops, but for some reason I'm feeling too nervous to do it. Even though there's hardly anybody in there, the place begins to feel suffocating, and I decide to leave, walking back out onto the empty street. Almost immediately I get this feeling like I'm being watched. I feel my gaze drifting up and up towards the apartment. Soon I'm looking at my balcony and I see somebody standing there. It's a dark figure. They're completely still, completely straight, stiff to the point where it nearly resembles a mannequin. But it isn't one. If I look closely, I can see it just slightly swaying. I freeze in place, my mind hardly able to understand or accept what I'm seeing. It's not my roommate. It's too tall. In fact, it's too tall to be anybody I know. Its head nearly scrapes the balcony above it. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make out any details. The darkness in the distance may have been enough to explain that away, but there was something about it that drove me towards a different conclusion. That this thing is simply possessed of no details that I could observe. That the only element of its composition was that unadulterated darkness. Of course, my gut instinct was to get the hell away from it, but the voice in my head was telling me that if I tried to run, it'd end up following me. I went back into McDonald's instead, locked myself in the bathroom, and finally dialed 911. I told the operator that someone had broken into my place, but that I'd gotten out of there without them noticing me, but that they were still in there. It was the story that most accurately represented the situation, without, making me come across as batshit. The operator told me that they'd send someone over, but I needed to hang tight. I left the bathroom, waiting at the table closest to the exit, till I could see the red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. I went outside to meet the cop, looking up at the balcony to find it empty, though the door to the living room had been left open. They pelted me with a bunch of questions that I found difficult to answer. Is the intruder armed? Do I have any idea who it might be? What are their intentions? I told them I didn't know, that I couldn't figure it out, but they just kept asking. Soon I was basically yelling at them to go up there and check it out for themselves, and I suppose the terror in my voice was enough for them to begin taking it seriously. They told me to wait by the entrance, and I watched as they went into the building. I was out there for a long time, growing increasingly anxious at the thought of what was going on up there and what they were going to tell me when they came back down. A few minutes later, the silence was broken by a single muffled gunshot. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I continued to wait, unsure of what to do. 20 more minutes of silence, and the officers still hadn't come back down. Soon I could hear more of them approaching in the distance. Before I knew it, 4 more cop cars had pulled up around me, and the scene had fallen into chaos. Officers shouting over each other and into the radio, more questions being hurled my way, none of which I was able to answer. The next few sequences were mostly a blur, but I remember the building being evacuated, the tenants frightened and confused as they were ushered outside while the officers became more and more frantic. I remember hearing more scattered gunshots, some screaming, other noises that were difficult to make sense of. There were a few lapses in my memory after that, but I recall being pushed into the back of a police car. After being driven to the station, I was led into an interrogation room where I found 2 nondescript men in suits waiting for me. They didn't introduce themselves and immediately went into a series of questions, each more bizarre than the last. What company was your roommate employed by? What was the nature of his job? How many different people have been inside your apartment since your roommate moved in? Have you ever heard voices inside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? Voices that did not belong to your roommate? Have you ever seen a circle of people standing outside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? People that were exceptionally tall. And one of the most unsettling ones, have you ever seen someone standing at the foot of your bed upon waking up between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m., only for them to disappear moments later? If so, do you remember what they looked like? Any distinct features? As they continued to probe me, my mind began conjuring up some pretty strange stuff that had happened after my roommate had moved in. Stuff I had written off as a figment of my imagination, simply because I had no other explanation. I did hear the voices, always coming from the room next to mine, where my roommate slept. I was always so tired when I heard them, but I do remember. Usually sounded like a young woman or a man with an extremely deep voice. I could never make out the words. It always just sounded like gibberish. Then there was that one time I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Still half asleep, I didn't bother turning the lights on as I went in. But as my eyes began to adjust to the darkness, I could have sworn that somebody was already sitting on the toilet. Somebody extremely tall. Of course, when I turned the lights on, nobody was there. It was easy to chalk up as a product of late-night drowsies at the time, and I never really thought about it after that. After doing my best to give them useful information, the suits spent a good few minutes taking notes on their phones. Once they were done, they sat up quickly, told me that they'd be in touch before leaving the room. Cop came in a few minutes later and told me that since I couldn't go back to my apartment, they'd set me up in a nearby hotel until they were able to get the situation under control, and that I should stay put until they call me. What happened? I asked. What did the guy do? What did you guys find up there? He stared at me for a long time, not as if he were deep in thought, but as if he held deep aversions for what he considered telling me. Eventually, he just shook his head. I don't know. I really don't know. I nodded, tried to smile, though I'm sure it didn't come across very well. It's the next day now, and I'm in the hotel. Of course, I couldn't sleep, couldn't really eat. The officers haven't called me yet. When I try searching up information about the evacuation on the internet, all I can find are articles claiming that it was due to a fire. A fire? Are you joking me? Update. I fell asleep and just woke up. It's 1 a.m. now. I can hear the shower.
And just like that, we've finished our tales for another day. But don't be sad. There'll be plenty of more cozy horror to come soon enough. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.